Underneath the heavy clouds that loomed over the quiet farmland, a sense of foreboding wrapped its cold fingers around the old homestead. The evening sun, a fiery ember sinking low on the horizon, painted the fields in a desperate shade of orange. But the warmth didn't reach the farmer's heart. Tonight, something wicked prowled beyond the edges of his land. Jacob Miller Strong, weathered and unyielding, had spent every waking hour nurturing this land. He often whispered to his crops, coaxing them to muster every ounce of their strength. But now, as shadows lengthened and the dark drew near, the sound of cracking twigs sliced through the mild evening air. His heart began to race. There was a danger lurking, something more than just animals seeking a midnight meal. No, this wasn't a simple fox or raccoon. He had heard the stories' whispers that danced through the townsfolk's lips like a secret breath. Prowlers, they called them. Lurkers who weren't content to scavenge just the scraps. They had come with the darkness, drifting through the trees like ghosts hungry for more than just food, hungry for territory, for power. Jacob stepped out of his rickety porch and into the growing gloom. The familiar creaks of the old floorboards seemed to swell with urgency. He had witnessed storms, droughts, and even the slumbering silence of winter, but beasts that shed the very notion of humanity. They were something entirely different. A primal fear coiled deep within him as he squinted into the night. The wind whipped around him, carrying scents both familiar and foreign. It rustled through the fields, dancing through the rows of corn that swayed like sentinels keeping watch. He could feel them in the distance, beady eyes fixating on him, watching, waiting for their moment. He wasn't one to back down, but a creeping doubt began to lace through his thoughts. What if the stories were true? What if these prowlers had come not just to test the land, but to test him? Hours passed like solemn seconds. The darkness thickened, transforming the familiar landscape into an unfamiliar maze. Jacob's grip tightened around the handle of his father's old shovel, the weight both comforting and frightful. He didn't know what was out there, but he knew he couldn't show fear. Not now, not ever. Just then, the silence shattered. A guttural growl echoed from the woods, strong and ominous, a warning that danced on the edge of his resolve. A flash of movement flickered between the trees. Jacob's heart raced, muscles tensed, each beat resonating like the distant drums of war echoing in the shadows. He knew he had to act, had to protect not only his land but the very legacy built here, from his father to his father's father. Generations had poured sweat and blood into this earth, and he wouldn't let it be claimed by darkness. With a surge of defiance, Jacob took a step forward, spilling his resolve into the air like a thick fog. He approached the woods, each footfall steady and deliberate. The growl stirred again, this time closer, like a wolf feeling the heat of its prey. But Jacob, intrigued, compelled by an unfamiliar sense of purpose. He was no lamb waiting to be slaughtered. He was the shepherd. With the moonlight now spilling through the branches, illuminating the ground around him, Jacob caught sight of them. Two hulking forms slipped out from the shadows, lean but muscular, eyes glinting like shards of glass reflecting the moon. Their breaths, heavy and labored, echoed in the still night air. His heart pounded in his chest, but he held his ground. "Back away," he shouted, voice deep and steady. "This is my land." The creatures paused, their eyes narrowing, assessing him as if he were the interloper. Fear twisted in his gut, but determination rose, flaring into a warm blaze. He couldn't retreat, not for them, not for anyone. Suddenly, one of the lighter figures struck, bounding forward with the speed of a hunting arrow, teeth bared and claws unsheathed. Jacob swung the shovel, a flash of steel that connected with bone. A howl erupted, sharp and piercing, slicing through the night. His heart raced faster, every nerve alight as he sensed the fierce pulse of life and death flowing all around. Adrenaline surged through him, vibrating with the raw instinct to survive. The creature staggered back, blinking. Jacob's mind, spiraling through a haze of instinct and shock, felt tethered to a primal force. This was more than just a battle. This was a sacred fight for his land, for memory, and for his very existence. With every swing of the shovel, he defended a piece of his heart. Shadows lunged at him, darting in and out like whispers of fear, but he was no longer just a farmer, no longer just a man bound to the soil. He had become an avenger for his lineage. His resolve ignited the very air as he squared his shoulders against the brewing storm of violence around him. In that dire moment, he felt everything within him come alive. Pain and fear crammed themselves into the corners of his mind, yet determination now screamed in his ears. Every swing of that shovel echoed legacy, the spirits of ancestors echoing alongside him as they cast their shadows. Courage wrapped around him like a bridge to the past. The confrontation felt like an eternity, a hatchet of time swinging, a balance of strength, fear, and will. With the fury of thunder, Jacob continued to push against the tide of darkness, each clash a defiant roar. The Prowlers retreated momentarily, calculating. Fear twined with ferocity in their eyes, but something in Jacob had shifted. They were on his land, and he meant to remind them of that reality. The moon hung high and bled silver light over the battleground. It was as if the world held its breath, waiting for the tide to turn. Jacob could judge their hesitance now, the way they lingered just out of reach. The raw energy pulsed around him as he caught his breath, the shovel held high, his eyes fierce. He shouted, finding new strength in his own voice. "You think you can take what's mine? I've fought to keep this land alive long before your kind shed the last shred of humanity, and I'll keep fighting until it's just a memory of the past." The Prowlers exchanged glances, sizing him up anew. They needed him weak spook to turn away and flee, but he found clarity and strength in that confrontation of wills. The fierce fire ignited inside him didn't just scare them, it began to haunt them. Seeing the unyielding resolve stretched across the expanse of his face, the growls softened and retreat became an option. Suddenly, one of the Prowlers took a step back. It was a subtle moment of flinch, an acknowledgement. The truth unveiled itself like a waterfall cascading over rocks. They were not just fighting him, they were testing him, testing his spirit against the tide of their predatory instinct. "No," Jacob seethed, voice low but musical with triumph. "You've lost your way. This land has a heartbeat and you won't silence it." With a tension cut like a knife, the dark figures turned and slipped back into the shadows. He felt the heat of victory surge through his veins. He had faced the darkness embodied, stared into the abyss, and emerged holding the strings of his fate. The Prowlers crept away, like fading echoes slipping into the night. As the last flicker of their presence disappeared, Jacob fell to his knees, the shovel clattering to the ground. Breathless, he looked out over his fields, every stalk a testament to the fight that had just unfolded. The wind swept through the land, carrying whispers that he could almost hear, voices of gratitude mingling with the sigh of the soil. He had stood his ground against the encroaching void. And the farmer, the guardian of this land, as the sun set on a battlefield, watched the horizon bloom with dawn once more. A new day dawning, born from the ashes of fear, strong with the promise of resilience. The moon hung like a silver coin in the night sky, casting eerie light across the sprawling fields. Shadows danced creepily between the rows of corn, whispering secrets to the wind. And in the heart of that quiet expanse, Jacob Miller, a farmer etched with weathered lines of determination, stood still. A shiver ran down his spine as he sensed the familiar tension coiling around him, the kind that crawled in the air when something wasn't right. He had been raised on these lands, his hands stained with the earth's warmth. Each furrow turned, each seed sown had woven his spirit into the fabric of this land. But tonight the air was heavy, thick with something more sinister than the usual chill. Behind the barn, a sound, a low growl hissed through the night, sharp as glass. Jacob's heart dropped. It was the kind of sound that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. Memories flickered through his mind, old tales told by the firelight, stories of prowlers creeping onto sacred land, drawn to the soft thrum of life like a moth to flame. He had dismissed them, thinking they were just that, tales to frighten children. But now, as the growl echoed again, reverberating through the darkness, he realized those stories were rooted in truth. Taking a deep breath, he steeled himself. He could feel it in his bones. The prowlers were real and they were coming for him. The whispers that drifted through town had transformed into tangible threats right beneath his very feet. He glanced toward the barn, nervous tension tightening like a vice. Would he stand firm against whatever shadows lurked beyond the glow of the porch light? The growling intensified, rising like the wind before a storm. With a determination he didn't know he possessed, Jacob stepped from the safety of the porch into the inky blackness. Each footfall crunched on the gravel, echoing in the still air, a statement of defiance against whatever lay ahead. This was his land, his home. He would protect it with every ounce of his being. As he approached the edge of the woods bordering his fields, moonlight spilled through the trees, revealing a gnarled path woven with fallen branches and thick underbrush. The darkness felt alive, writhing with hidden dangers. He could almost taste the tension, as if the earth itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Heart pounding, he gripped the handle of his old pickaxe, the metal cool and steady in his hands, a familiar weight that felt less like a tool and more like a shield. Then, out of the shadows emerged two figures, slick and muscular, their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The Prowlers, their forms glistening in the pale light, were more imposing than any story had ever prepared him for. They moved in a synchrony that spoke of instinct and cunning, a creature forged from shadow and fear. With each slow step they took, Jacob felt the weight of generations behind him. The farmers before him who had sowed this land, fought battles for livelihoods, forged legacies against insurmountable odds. He locked his weary gaze on the creatures, defiance coursing through his veins as adrenaline surged like wildfire. He shouted, voice echoing with raw power. But to the Prowlers, his words were merely a challenge, their growls deepening as they advanced, undeterred. He stepped forward, raising the pickaxe as if it were a banished sword, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. For a moment, time stood still, the universe holding its breath as Jacob awaited their response. The first Prowler, lean and elegantly poised, lunged at him, a blur of fur and teeth. Jacob swung the pickaxe wide, gripping it tightly, feeling the adrenaline wash over him like a flood. The steel met flesh with a sickening thud, and the creature stumbled back, shrieking in agony. Its howl pierced through the night, a haunting sound that echoed his resolve. But if one had stepped back, another charged. The second Prowler attacked with a ferocity that sent Jacob reeling. Claws scraped against his jacket as he barely swayed out of the way, instinct driving him to dodge. Fear clawed at the back of his mind, desperate to sink its teeth in, but he fought against it. He couldn't afford to succumb, not now, not here. The midnight air crackled with tension as he danced with the second Prowler, every movement carefully calculated. He swung again, landing another strike that sent the creature tumbling into the dirt. As it yelped, frustration surged through Jacob. These creatures weren't just intruding, they were challenging everything he held dear. With every strike, he felt the years of hardship, sweat, and hope weaving a tapestry of strength within him. He remembered his father, weathered hands guiding his young self through the fields, teaching him the redemption of toil and pride. Jacob wasn't just fighting for his land. He was fighting for the very spirit of those who had come before him, for every seed sown and every storm weathered. But just as he found his rhythm, a sudden sting shot through his ankle. A third Prowler emerged from behind, slashing with newfound fury, its teeth glinting menacingly in the moonlight. Jacob stumbled, panting, and for a moment doubts began to creep in under the cracks of his resolve. They were stronger than he had anticipated. Perhaps he could have run, fled to safety, but within a voice roared. Fear or survival, he chose the latter. Gathering himself, he raised the pickaxe higher, heart-pounding defiance lighting his eyes. You want this land. Fueled by adrenaline, he pushed forward, charging at the Prowlers, forcing them to retreat step by step. He felt the earth beneath him tremble in solidarity. It wasn't just him standing against them. It was everything this land represented, the years of struggle, the love entwined in every season, the legacy waiting to be reclaimed. As one of the creatures turned to flee into the woods, something shifted in the air. The remaining Prowler paused, fangs bared but uncertain, sensing a tremor of fear rolling through its own primal instincts. In that moment of hesitation, Jacob charged, breaking through the threshold of doubt that had tried to ensnare him. The pickaxe swung again, slicing through the air, roaring with purpose. It connected with bone, meeting resistance, but Jacob wasn't about to falter now. The embodiment of every farmer that had come before him surged through his veins. The creature yelped, a sound melting into a whimper, confusion flashing across its eyes as it realized it was facing not just a man, but an unyielding spirit. The fight had transformed, not just for Jacob, but for them as well. In those moments, he understood. The Prowlers weren't mere beasts driven by hunger. They were testing the limits of survival, just as he was. For every challenge they faced, every shadow they crossed, there was a deeper instinct to push, to see how far one could go before the threat became too great. Jacob stepped forward, his heart pounding not with fear, but with an awakening sense of purpose. He roared, voice echoing out into the vast night sky, reverberating across the fields like a war drum. With renewed vigor, he prepared to meet the creatures with all his might. The howls echoed around him, fading, retreating into the woods, mingling with the rustle of leaves as uncertainty gripped their hearts. Jacob sensed their fear, a primal instinct that resonated powerfully within him. The prowler lurched back, uncertainty writ large in its eyes, and with a final, distraught noise it turned, retreating into the shadows from which it came. The land fell silent. A heavy weight of stillness enveloped the farm as Jacob stood amidst the scattered remnants of the battle. He was drenched in sweat, heart racing, breaths heavy as he fought against the crashing waves of exhaustion. In that silence, as the world exhaled, he realized something profound. It wasn't just about driving back the darkness, but illuminating the strength that was buried within. The Prowlers hadn't just invaded his fields, they had force-fed him courage, revealing layers of bravery he hadn't known existed. Jacob stood tall, looking out into the night, sipping in the aftermath of victory that saturated the air. The moon glowed as a guardian, hanging bright above him, and with it came the sacred promise of renewal. This was his land. His legacy would endure. As he faced the wide expanse of crops waving gently in the breeze, confidence washed over him like a balm. The stories were true, yes, but now he would be the one to write them. Generations would speak of this night, a farmer who stood his ground against the prowlers of despair, a warrior who embraced the spirit of his ancestors, fighting for every heart that beat beneath the soil. Days would rise and fall, storms would come, and the seasons would shift. But when the darkness crept back, as it always did, they would find him standing here, unwavering, a sentinel at the threshold of the land he loved. And so, under the watchful gaze of the night sky, Jacob Miller reconnected not only with his fields, but with the very heartbeat of the earth itself. He would stand guard, forever rooted in the truth that courage was not a singular strike, but a persistent push against the darkness, a bond woven into the fabric of the land he called home. The chill of the autumn night settled heavily over the fields of Roscoe Farm. It was the kind of night that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise, where every rustle of leaves was amplified, every shadow stretched into the unknown. That's when Jacob Miller first noticed them dark shapes flitting between the trees, slipping through the night with an eerie silence that sent a shiver down his spine. It was more than just a chill, it was a primal instinct, a raw survival instinct thrumming beneath the surface. For years he had toiled on this land, his hands hard and calloused from years of labor. The farmer knew each inch of the soil, every groove in the land he had nurtured. He could sense when something was wrong, and tonight, something felt terribly wrong. Jacob peered into the dark, squinting against the shadows that danced just beyond the reach of his flashlight. The beams sliced through the darkness but only revealed more obscurity. The stories spoken in hushed whispers around tavern tables began to swirl in his mind, tales of prowlers, creatures creeping onto fields with wicked intentions. He had laughed them off as folklore, yet here he stood, pulse racing, heart hammering against his chest. He took a deep breath, grounding himself. He wasn't just a farmer, he was the protector of this land, the steward of the generations that had come before him. If these prowlers wanted to invade, they would find him standing firm, the weight of his family's legacy bolstering his courage. The first growl pierced the silence, low, menacing. It seemed to vibrate through the earth, creating a resonance that pulled Jacob from his thoughts. His heart raced faster as he gripped the wooden handle of his pitchfork, an unlikely but comforting support in that moment. He knew the land needed him. He didn't just belong here, he was a part of it. With cautious steps, he approached the edge of the woods, The air was thick, almost electric, charged with tension. The shadows writhed, almost aware of his presence. Then, just at the limit of the flashlight's beam, he saw them, a pair of haunting eyes reflecting the light like twin stars fallen to earth. The Prowlers, lean, sinewy figures, lurked just within the line of trees, their fur matted and dark, bodies poised as if ready to pounce. The story suddenly felt far too real. This was no mere tale spun to frighten children. It was an imminent threat to everything he held dear. Jacob steeled himself. He took another step forward. The words were fierce but trembled slightly. He raised the pitchfork, the tines glinting in the dim light, casting a shadow that painted him as an unyielding guardian. The creatures shifted, growls rumbling from deep within their throats, and he could see the calculation in their eyes. They circled, testing him. It was a challenge, a contest that would determine who owned the night. But beneath their confidence dwelled a flicker of doubt. They were not invincible, they were predators out of their element, encroaching on territory fiercely protected. Suddenly, one lunged. Jacob's instincts kicked in, his body moving before his mind had fully processed the threat. He thrust the pitchfork forward, the metal meeting an ephemeral shadow as the creature barely dodged the attack, wild eyes wide with surprise. It was exhilarating. Time slowed for a moment, and although fear fluttered in his chest, so did a new resolve. The creature roared, a primal sound that echoed across the fields, a battle cry that set every nerve in Jacob on edge. He could feel the adrenaline surging through him, igniting every instinct. He dodged another charge, narrowly avoiding the sharp claws that slashed through the air. Sweat dotted his brow even in the cool night, each breath a reminder of the intensity of the moment. But amid the chaos, he held firm. His family's legacy wasn't just about crops and harvests. It was about courage, the heart that beat within the very land beneath his feet. He took a moment to assess the situation, weighing his options, feeling the weight of decades resting on his shoulders. The Prowlers backed off momentarily, seemingly reconsidering their approach. And in that heart-stopping stillness, Jacob's resolve deepened. This was more than just a conflict of strength. It was a battle against the fears that haunted him. He thought of his father, who had stood against storms and droughts, who had whispered tales of bravery and resilience in the face of adversity. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every soul that had ever placed their hands in the soil, for every seed that had ever germinated under the sun. He felt the weight of their stories surge within him. He had to remind himself they had all faced darkness, and anyone who dared step into this realm bore witness to that spirit. The growling grew louder, and he felt a swell of anger rise. "You think you can scare me off? This is my home." His voice boomed through the night, reverberating against the trees like a war drum. And for a brief flicker, he saw the astonished recognition in their eyes. They were testing him, probing his limits. And he would not break. He lunged forward, the pitchfork cutting through the air like a weapon forged in the fires of his ancestry. The first of the Prowlers snarled, twisting away just in time, but the second caught the edge of his weapon, a staggering blow that sent it rolling back. Blood. It was a small victory, but it electrified the air. With every movement, he felt the fears of generations pour into him, urging him onwards. He was solid, strong like the roots that anchored ancient trees. The creatures, sensing the shift, hesitated. Their hesitation was a crack in their armor, a momentary glimpse into their own vulnerability. In that moment of uncertainty, Jacob charged again, charging forward with everything he had. The weight of every struggle, every hardship, every night spent under the flicker of stars. He was a pillar of resolve, standing up against the predators not only of flesh but fear itself. With clawing determination, he plunged the pitchfork downward, landing that final, meaningful strike against the Prowlers. The second creature howled, retreating into the shadows, leaving behind a silence fraught with tension. The battle had transformed. Jacob had turned the tide not with sheer strength, but with the spirit etched in his very being. Yet as the night fell silent, the echoes of that growl remained, haunting him. Victory felt bittersweet now, for the Prowlers hadn't just attacked his land. They had stirred something deep within him, something that resonated far beyond the physical realm. They had challenged him to confront every fear he had hidden in the silent fear of loss, fear of change, fear of simply not being enough. Standing amidst the broken earth and scattered remnants of battle, his heart still racing, Jacob glanced toward the woods once more. The prowlers crept back into the shadows, no longer the dominant hunters they thought they were. Tonight, they had learned a lesson, just as he had. The fields were quiet now, but the fight wouldn't end here. He settled the pitchfork into the ground, exhaustion creeping into his muscles. But beneath the fatigue lay a deep sense of empowerment. He felt a pull to his soil, an unbreakable bond that twined through every blade of grass, every vine, every crop that grew. As the first rays of dawn began to stretch across the fields, bathing everything in golden light, Jacob realized something monumental. Fear would always lurk in the corners of darkness. Prowlers would always wait at the periphery, ever eager to test the sanctity of what he had fought for. But also, he understood it was his strength, the strength coursing through the very heartbeat of the land, that would keep him standing, steadfast against whatever darkness dared to encroach. The sun spread its warm fingers across the horizon, fading the fears of the night into mere shadows of memory. Jacob knew the land beneath his feet was more than soil. It was legacy, purpose, and spirit. He gathered that strength around him like a mantle, ready for whatever prowlers might come his way in the future. Today, he stood firm. Tomorrow, he would rise again. And as long as there was breath in his lungs, he would always protect what was a guardian of the earth, a custodian of history, a farmer standing unwavering against the night. The night air was thick, heavy with tension, and the moon hung like a watchful sentinel over Roscoe Farm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness seeped into every corner of the land, swallowing the familiar and giving rise to the unknown. Beneath that silvery glow, a pair of glowing eyes flickered in the distance, watching, waiting. Jacob Miller, the steadfast farmer who had toiled the fields for decades, felt his breath catch in his throat. Every evening he would walk the borders of his land, a ritual of sorts, but tonight there was something different, a sense of danger lurking just beyond the edge of familiarity. The stories of prowlers creeping onto the land were whispered around bonfires and in the dim light of country bars, tales meant to scare children. Yet here he was, living out the very essence of those chilling tales. A low growl resonated from the woods, a sound that felt like ice running down his spine. Jacob turned, taking in the rustling tall grass and the trees that guarded the perimeter of his farm. The tales told of creatures, lean and hungry, seeking something meant only for the courageous to defend. He could feel that primal instinct awaken, fear dancing in his gut but courage sparking in his heart. Jacob had worked this land since he was a boy, following in his father's footsteps, investing every ounce of himself into the soil. All that sweat, all that labor, this was his legacy, his pride. No prowler, no beast, real or imagined, would take it from him. As he gripped the handle of his trusty pitchfork, he felt it transform from a mere tool into a weapon of resolve. The land fell silent, as if nature itself were holding its breath. Jacob steeled himself and took a step forward, treading carefully but with purpose. It was in this moment of stillness, heart racing, that he locked eyes with the prowlers. Two dark shapes materialized from the underbrush, their bodies coiled with sinewy strength. Glinting eyes watched him with an intensity that revealed their hunger not just for food, but for the very essence of life that this land thrummed with. Jacob shouted, his voice booming across the stillness. The challenge hung in the air thick and taut, reverberating like a war cry. He struck the ground with his pitchfork, sending splashes of dirt into the air as if to assert his dominion. The prowlers paused, the energy between them shifting into palpable tension. With every heartbeat, Jacob felt the weight of history resting on him, every farmer that had come before him urging him to stand firm. There was a legacy woven deep into the soil his father had fought against storms, droughts, and the harsh winter winds. And now, Jacob faced the embodiment of every fear that sought to undermine that legacy. The prowlers growled low, their sinewy bodies shifting as they circled him, testing his resolve. This was more than a battle of strength, it was a clash of wills. The flicker of doubt was buried beneath the stubborn fortitude of a man who had faced life's adversities head-on. He had grown up on these fields, He knew their strengths and weaknesses like an old friend. Just when the silence began to stretch too far, one of the prowlers lunged. Jacob's instincts took over. His body reacted a twist of muscle, a swing of the pitchfork. He felt the rush of adrenaline as steel met flesh. The pitchfork sank deep, the animal screeching in surprise. A flash of victory surged through him. Perhaps these creatures would learn tonight. But just as quickly as that victory ignited, the other prowler launched at him with ferocity, its eyes wild with rage. Claws swiped through the air, narrowly missing Jacob. He twisted away, heart pounding. Fear chased him, whispering doubts that clawed at the edges of his mind, but defiance burned fiercely within. He would not back down. The prowler, more agile than he anticipated, darted in again, but he was ready this time. With a firm grip on the pitchfork, he swung it around, the blade slicing through the air. It found its mark, landing another blow against the creature, redirecting its momentum and sending it sprawling into the underbrush. The words escaped him, an affirmation that rose above the fear. He was not just defending a physical space. He was pushing back against the shadows that threatened to engulf his very essence. The remaining prowler hesitated. It stood, sizing him up, sense prickling with uncertainty. The air vibrated with the tension of the moment, two forces held in stalemate. Jacob could feel the beating of his heart sync with the rhythm of the night, and in that quiet fury he pressed on. He shouted, voice steady, fiercer than the ragged breaths escaping his throat. He wouldn't let fear take hold. It was a moment of clarity, realization dawning. He was strong, forged in the fires of struggle. The prowlers might be fierce, but he was determined. With a sudden surge of energy, he charged, pitchfork poised like a lance. This wasn't just a physical altercation. It was a battle of spirit. Each swing he delivered echoed with the resolve of his ancestors, those who had cultivated the soil, who had found beauty in dirt, who had faced storms and come out stronger. Time stretched, each movement laden with significance. The prowler tried to dodge but was too slow. Jacob found his mark yet again. The creature howled, dismay seeping into its eyes as it stumbled backward, confusion giving way to retreat. Yet the battle was not yet over. The first prowler, licking its wounds, staggered back into the fray, fueled by desperation. The two creatures had turned, narrowing their gaze on Jacob, forces of nature now united against a common foe. With their combined fury, they lunged. Courage surged through Jacob as he fought back, the pitchfork becoming an extension of his very will. But he was only one man against two powerful foes. The struggle wrought sweat from his brow, the cold bite of fear still prowling at the fringes of his resolve. It would be easy to succumb, easy to allow doubt to creep in like the night around him. But as he struck again, feeling the rush of energy tighten in his limbs, he realized he was battling not just them, but the darkness within. With one final push, he swung wildly, a last effort infused with everything he had left. The creatures, unnerved by his intensity, hesitated for just a heartbeat. In that split second, Jacob seized the opportunity and threw himself forward, pitchfork aimed at the heart of the challenge. He could feel the weight of time suspend, trembling on the edge of victory and defeat. The pitchfork found its mark, the metal meeting flesh with a sickening thud as Jacob heard the collective gasp of the prowlers as they reeled backward. With a desperate howl, they turned and dashed into the night, shadows fleeing from the light of his resolve. The silence returned, heavier now, but tinged with the bittersweet taste of triumph. Jacob stood panting, drenched in sweat and adrenaline. He had faced them and driven them away, but at what cost? The land was scarred, he was wounded. With every beat of his heart, he realized this wasn't just about physical battles. It was a testament, a reminder that darkness would always try to creep in, that life would always pose its threats. But each time it did, he would be there, standing strong. He was not merely a farmer, he was the guardian of this land, a bastion against whatever prowlers dared to cross the threshold. As the first rays of dawn began to crest over the horizon, bathing the fields in gentle warmth, Jacob allowed himself a moment to reflect. The world around him began to reclaim its beauty, the colors bursting forth as if in celebration of life, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, light would inevitably follow. He rested against the pitchfork, eyes surveying the landscape. the crops swaying gently in the morning breeze, bright and full of promise. This land was rich with history, and he would defend it through every storm, every prowler, every shadow of doubt that sought to encroach upon it. "I am home," he whispered to the wind, feeling the weight of generations rise within him. He wiped the sweat from his brow, determination solidifying his stance. The prowlers may have crept onto the land, but the resolve of a farmer was a force unrivaled. Jacob took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the earth, the crispness of the morning air, and the unyielding promise of the new day. With strength renewed, he stepped forward, ready to till the soil, plant the seeds, and prepare for the seasons ahead. Every encounter only served to deepen his roots, tethering him to this land he called home. The prowlers would return, that he knew. But as long as he stood his ground, they would find a powerful adversary waiting for them. A resolute farmer who understood that even when darkness loomed, courage would be the bright beacon guiding him home. The wind whistled through the tall grass, whispering secrets only nature could understand. Under the veil of darkness, a chill wrapped around Jacob Miller's shoulders as he surveyed his fields, his sanctuary a patchwork of green and brown that had flourished under his care for decades. But tonight something felt different. An unease settled in the pit of his stomach, a sensation he couldn't shake off. He stepped carefully through the soft earth, boots sinking slightly into the loamy soil. The clang of his old farming tools ringing in his ears felt oddly comforting against the sounds of the night. He often walked the perimeter of his property, an act of routine, but tonight, with the moon hanging low in the sky, it felt more like a premonition. Just then, a sharp crack shattered the tranquility. Jacob's heart raced as he turned toward the sound. Fear coiled tightly around him. Had he heard it right? Or was it just the wind playing tricks? He squinted into the dark expanse, feeling the weight of his responsibility pressing down harder than ever. As a farmer, he understood seasons and storms, but unseen threats rising from the shadows. That was uncharted territory. Creating a small circle with his flashlight, he caught a glimmer of something moving amongst the trees at the edge of his land. A flash of dark fur, eyes gleaming like polished stones reflecting the moonlight. His pulse quickened. The stories that echoed in the taverns and around campfires came flooding back. Tales of prowlers, ruthless creatures that slipped through the darkness, seeking easy prey. They had always seemed like folklore, tales designed to frighten children. But tonight those stories bled into reality. He muttered to himself, a tremor creeping into his voice. Jacob locked his grip tighter around the pitchfork in his hand, its wooden shaft worn from use. The tool felt familiar, even grounding, the weight reassuring against the anxiety pooling in his stomach. He reminded himself that he had fought to build this land, to nurture it into something vital and alive. Whatever prowlers prowled in the night would find him standing his ground. With a sharp intake of breath, he stepped forward, determined to confront the looming darkness. As he approached the edge of the woods, shadows danced like whispers, teasing the remnants of his courage. The low growl he heard earlier echoed again, resonating from the thicket, a warning, a challenge. Jacob squared his shoulders. He refused to yield, not when so much was at stake. The branches overhead creaked, swaying gently in the breeze, as if nature itself held its breath. Jacob focused, heart pounding in his chest, gripping the pitchfork tightly as he honed in on the sounds. Suddenly, from the veil of shadows, two grotesque forms emerged, lean and sinewy, moving with the grace of trained predators. Jacob's throat went dry as their eyes locked with his. One prowler, larger than the other, stepped forward, muscles coiling beneath its matted fur, teeth bared in a snarl that sent a shiver of fear cascading through him. The smaller prowler circled, an agile ghost, testing his resolve. In that moment, every ounce of doubt rushed to the surface. But he could not allow fear to win. He had to remind himself of who he was, a fighter, a protector. Jacob shouted, voice firm yet tinged with the urgent tremor of the unknown. The pitchfork raised before him, glinting dangerously in the moonlight, became an extension of his very being. He was ready for a fight, not just for his land, but for the very legacy sewn into every inch of it. The beasts hesitated, sensing the weight of his challenge, uncertainty flickering across their predatory eyes. Upon their hesitance, Jacob seized the opportunity, charging forward. Without thinking, he thrust the pitchfork toward the larger prowler, aiming for the heart of the threat. The creature sprang aside, narrowly escaping the strike, but Jacob's relentless spirit fueled him. Each swing and jab seemed to draw more strength from the soil beneath him. He roared, his voice echoing through the night, carving the air thick with his resolve. The smaller prowler lunged, claws flashing in the dim light. Adrenaline surged through Jacob as he sidestepped, smacking the ground with his pitchfork. He had grown up chasing storms and wrestling with the earth, but the fight wasn't just physical. It was about survival, a battle to protect the roots that held generations of history. Striking again with a desperate force, he thrust the pitchfork deep toward the smaller creature, his heart pounding. It felt as if he'd conjured the strength of all the farmers that had come before him, each moment of hardship, every sacrifice. This was more than a battle, it was life itself. With a howl of pain, the smaller prowler stumbled back, surprise flashing in its eyes. Jacob could see the shift. They weren't just feral beasts, they were wary creatures, startled by his unexpected ferocity. The blood rush in his ears drowned out the growls, and a strange clarity settled in. This was his moment of truth. He was the guardian of his land. But just as Jacob felt the tide of battle turn in his favor, the larger prowler charged. Adrenaline exploded in his veins as his instincts kicked into overdrive. Swinging the pitchfork with all his might, he swung wide. Metal clanged into flesh, but the beast was quick. It evaded, scraping its claws across Jacob's arm, pain shooting through him like fire. He gritted his teeth against the agony, refusing to falter. In that split second, he felt the raw pulse of fear in the air, mingled with an overwhelming sense of defiance. This confrontation was more than a fight, it was a clash of existence. Each growl sent vibrations through his very essence, but he had come too far to turn back now. He lunged forward once more, fueled by sheer determination. The world around him faded into a blur, a cocoon of purpose as he thrust his pitchfork into the darkness. The larger prowler connected again, pain radiating through him like a storm, but he pressed on, keeper of a legacy rooted deep into the core of this land. A final desperate strike landed. The creature hesitated, the moment stretching into eternity. And then, with a pained snarl, it turned, retreating back into the shadows from which it came, dragging its companion behind. Jacob stood there, chest heaving, breath ragged, disbelief creeping in alongside the adrenaline. The wind still whispered through the tall grass around him, but the night was now calm. Silence rushed in like a balm, a comforting embrace wrapping around what remained of his shattered bravado. He had stood his ground against the prowlers, had proven that he was indeed the master of his fate, yet the victory was bittersweet. He felt the sting of wounds, both physical and emotional evidence of the night's fierce battle. He surveyed his surroundings, dust settling over the remnants of his stand. The land was both scarred and alive, a living testament to the fight he had just endured. The cool breeze on his face felt sharp, a reminder of how close the darkness had come. Yet the morning light began to seep through the trees, casting shadows in soft relief. Jacob wiped the sweat from his brow, every breath tinged with the satisfaction of survival. But even in that satisfaction, he understood the deeper truth fear would always lurk in the shadows. Prowlers, real and imagined, would find ways to creep onto the land, testing every inch of resolve. Yet he also knew that he had risen to the challenge. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to stand firm despite it. And with that thought, a wave of clarity washed over him. The sun would rise again, illuminating every corner of his property, and with it, perhaps the prowlers would return. But for every encroachment of darkness, Jacob would find his strength. This land belonged to him, not just for himself, but for every soul that had sowed and reaped on it, every family that had called it home. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the fields in hues of gold and crimson, he felt a rush of gratitude and love for the very soil beneath his feet. Jacob took a deep breath, filling his lungs with hope. He straightened his back, countenance transformed, ready to face whatever the day may bring. "I am home," he whispered, the words echoing as affirmation. Each day he would stand vigilant, prepared to defend what was his, an unwavering farmer, against the encroaching shadows, the memories of battles past propelling him forward. For as long as he was here, he would protect the land with everything he had, a guardian steadfast against whatever prowlers dared to breach its borders. After all, in this life, it wasn't just about land. It was about heart, heritage, and an unshakable spirit that called him home. The night was darker than usual, an oppressive silence blanketing Roscoe Farm. Jacob Miller, a farmer with hands roughened by years of toil, paced the edge of his fields, the moonlight casting long shadows over the crops he had nurtured for decades. He lifted his flashlight, slicing through the darkness, the beam shaking slightly as unease settled in. Something was off. Just a few nights prior, he had dismissed the eerie howls and rustling sounds as harmless. But that night in the stillness, he sensed an unsettling presence beyond the tree line. It stirred a deep instinct within him, a primal knowledge that urged him to be vigilant. Stories from the old-timers danced in his mind, tales of prowlers, creatures that roamed under the cover of night, lurking on the periphery, hungry and relentless. Jacob stopped, the gravel crunching under his boots, and stared into the shadows of the woods. The thrill of danger tugged at him, but he couldn't afford to be afraid. Fear was a luxury he could not afford, not when so much was at stake. This land was his legacy, cultivated through sweat and sacrifice, and he would defend it until his last breath. His gaze scanned the surrounding fields, where the tall corn stalks rustled like whispers in the wind. The quiet stretched, thick and heavy, wrapping around him like a shroud. Just when he thought he imagined the tension, a low growl rippled through the silence, deep and menacing. Jacob's blood ran cold, instincts kicking in as a jolt of ice-fueled clarity surged through him. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted his grip on the pitchfork, a familiar tool that suddenly felt like a lifeline. He heard the stories whispered around the campfires at summer gatherings, cautionary tales meant to intrigue and intimidate. But those tales were now his reality, and it was all too real. Leaning on the pitchfork for strength, he stepped cautiously toward the edge of the woods, where shadows writhed and twisted like tendrils of smoke. The growl echoed again, this time closer, an unmistakable warning. His heart thundered against his ribcage like a drum. Jacob squared his shoulders and called into the darkness, voice steady, "Who's out there?" The response was silence, thick and palpable, holding its breath. He felt the tension ebb and flow around him, and though his knees quaked slightly, he refused to show fear. He had known hardships, droughts that scorched the earth, storms that ravaged his crops, and long winters that drained both spirit and resources. But this was a different struggle. This was a confrontation against the shadows that sought to overrun his home. Jacob moved deeper into the darkness, his flashlight beam quelling the fear that rose within him like a tide. He forced himself to breathe deeply, to center his thoughts. Out here on the land, he felt the pulse of life, the rich earth and the vigorous crops that swayed gently beneath the stars. He listened to the night, letting it seep into him, knowing that whatever prowled in the shadows could not extinguish the fire of his will. Suddenly, he glimpsed movement among the trees, dark silhouettes unfurling like the night itself. Through the murky shadows, two figures emerged, lean, powerful creatures, their fur sleek and glistening with the dampness of the night. Their eyes reflected the light like two ominous stars, unyielding, predatory. Jacob's breath hitched. The prowlers were real. The very creatures he had dismissed as urban legends now stood before him, poised to strike. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him, a mix of fear and fierce resolve igniting in his chest. He couldn't back down, not now, not ever. He shouted, voice rising in authority, his pitchfork held steady before him. "This is my land." The prowlers froze, their eyes narrowing, calculating his bravery. The larger one let out a low growl, a warning intimidation woven with primal instinct. Jacob felt that growl resonate in his bones, wrapping around the very essence of his fear. He had spent years watching his crops flourish, coaxing life from the soil, and he would not let these creatures dismantle what he had built. The smaller prowler darted forward without hesitation, a flash of motion through the night. Jacob's instincts kicked in as he swung the pitchfork, barely striking the creature but enough to make it hesitate, startled by his swiftness. The larger prowler snarled, a low, menacing growl that shattered the night's stillness. Inwardly, Jacob battled his fear, reminding himself of every storm he had weathered, every hardship he had overcome. This was not merely a fight for land, but a test of spirit and survival. He dug deep into that reservoir of strength that had kept him going through sleepless nights and toiling days. Renewed determination, Jacob shouted, "You think you can scare me?" The words roared from his lungs, a war cry that rippled through the tension, mingling with the sounds of the night. The growls shifted. He could see the hesitation in their movements as they reevaluated their approach. They were not just facing a frightened farmer. They were confronting a man who would fight for everything he held dear. Suddenly, the two prowlers launched their attack, a synchronized attempt to take him down. Jacob's reflexes were sharp. He twisted and sidestepped, the adrenaline coursing through him like wildfire. With a fierce strike, he plunged the pitchfork toward the larger creature, metal connected with flesh, a sickening sound that was music to his ears. A howl echoed through the air, raw and pained. The creature staggered back, eyes wide with surprise. It was not just physical strength he possessed, but sheer will and determination honed through years of labor on this very soil. The prowlers had underestimated him, but he was fueled by the determination of every soul that had tended this land before him. With unwavering zeal, he charged at the smaller prowler, driving the pitchfork forward, thrusting it with focused precision. The creature twisted and turned, but Jacob was relentless. He felt the connection, the impact of the pitchfork in his hands, and in that moment he realized he was no longer just defending his crops, he was defending his very identity. The smaller prowler let out a terrified yelp, retreating into the shadow-sphere, beginning to erode its bravado. Jacob didn't hesitate, the fight surging through him like warm blood. In the fray, he saw the larger prowler hesitating, wavering at the edge of the woods. For a heartbeat, it glanced back as if contemplating a retreat. He advanced again, pitchfork swinging wide, heart pounding fiercely. "You don't belong here," he shouted, voice filled with a raw intensity that echoed through the night air. The two creatures found themselves at a crossroads, caught between survival instincts and the unwavering spirit of a man who would not waver. Jacob could feel the shift, the doubts creeping into their minds. These were not just monsters. They were creatures wrestling with their own survival, just like him. Finally, with a low whimper, the larger prowler made a choice. It turned tail, dragging its companion into the safety of the woods, shadows swallowing them whole. Jacob stood amidst the stillness, heart pounding in his chest, breaths heavy yet triumphant. The night was now quiet, the tension ebbing away like the tide receding from the shore. With shaky hands, he set the pitchfork down, the adrenaline slowly draining from his body. He had faced the prowlers and triumphed. Yet, as the realization settled, a profound weariness enveloped him. He had fought not just for survival, but for the very essence of what it meant to be a steward of the land. Jacob looked out over the fields, taking in the rich soil glowing under the gentle kiss of the moonlight. Quiet returned, a soft symphony of crickets and rustling leaves guiding his thoughts. It was a reminder that he was not just a farmer, he was the protector of a legacy, anchored by the hard work of his forebears. As dawn approached, hues of orange and pink began to peek over the horizon, bathing the land in a warm, golden light. Jacob felt renewed. This wasn't just a farming victory, it was a declaration, his resilience shining brighter than ever before. He breathed deeply, feeling the gift of life all around him, the crops, the earth, the spirit of the land thriving under the warmth of the sun. The battle had forged a deeper connection, a link to every farmer who had come before him. If the prowlers dared return, they would find him waiting, anchored like an oak tree, grounded by centuries of wisdom and unwavering resolve. With the sun rising higher, illuminating the scars of the previous night, Jacob knew this was only the beginning. Every encounter with darkness would serve as a reminder of his strength, a testament to his unwillingness to yield. He squared his shoulders, eyes set with determination, ready to greet whatever came next with open arms. Today, he stood victorious, a guardian against the shadows, pledging to protect his home against the prowlers that sought not just land but legacy. As the tranquility of the morning washed over him, he accepted the truth. There would always be challenges, storms, darkness, and prowlers, but with each fight faced, he would continue to grow stronger. And so, he walked back to the heart of his farm, feeling the sun on his skin and the whisper of the wind in his ears. Jacob Miller would always stand his ground, not out of mere defiance, but because he believed in the spirit of what he fought for. Every seed sown, every struggle endured for life would always find a way to flourish amidst the shadows. In the heart of a dimming twilight, as dusk settled over Roscoe Farm, Jacob Miller stood at the edge of his fields, sensing something was amiss. The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and dark violet, but the colorful canvas didn't soothe his restless spirit. It was as if the land held its breath, steeling itself against an unseen danger. That night, an inexplicable chill danced along the back of his neck. He had spent years nurturing this land, toiling tirelessly through hot summers and bitter winters. But tonight, that toil felt lightweight against the weight of a looming threat. Just beyond the tree line, shadows shifted, and a low growl reverberated through the cool air, sending tremors through his body. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest, a primal warning echoing deep within him. He gripped his pitchfork tightly, the familiar wood providing some measure of comfort. It was more than just a tool. It was a part of him, a reminder of the many battles he'd fought on this land, and the resolve that drove him to flourish against all odds. "Whatever you are, I'll not let you take what's mine," he whispered to the gathering darkness, a vow wrapped in determination. The stories passed down through generations flooded his mind, tales of prowlers creeping into the night, hungry for the life nestled in the heart of the farmland. Small-town wisdom warned of cunning, creatures drawn to the vulnerability of the season's harvest. But what if those stories weren't merely ancient folklore? What if they harbored a kernel of truth like all good legends did? Jacob took a step forward, the grass crunching beneath his boots, feeling the earth pulse beneath him, tethering him to his legacy. Each step pulled him closer to the tree line, a battlefield where shadows merged into the rooted trees, their branches twisted like fingers in a silent choir of eerie anticipation. The closer he drew, the louder the growls became, deepening, resonating with a ferocity that sent flashes of fear spiraling through the depths of his chest. Suddenly, two pairs of glowing eyes emerged from the lurking dark, staring back with an unsettling intensity. They seemed almost to pierce through him, revealing unyielding ferocity that spoke of carnivorous hunger. He caught a glimpse of their sleek, matted fur, the athletic build of creatures who knew how to hunt, how to thrive. His gut twisted, but beneath the veneer of fear lay something stronger: defiance. Jacob commanded, his voice echoing through the trees. The pitchfork in his hands felt like a sword now, a barrier between the prowlers and the sanctuary he had cultivated with blood, sweat, and unyielding devotion. The first prowler hesitated, its body coiling like a spring, muscles tensing, calculating its next move. The second, however, lunged. Jacob barely managed to dodge the razor-like claws that swiped through the space he had occupied a moment ago. Adrenaline surged through him, every instinct screaming. It was fight or flight, and he chose to fight. He thrust the pitchfork forward with all his might, the tines catching one side of the creature just as it scrambled to regain balance. A guttural roar erupted, echoing through the night as the creature staggered back, confusion dancing in its eyes. Jacob felt a surge of triumph. He had struck it. But the second one, the first's partner in crime, launched itself forward, no hesitation this time. The air thickened with tension, and the growl erupted from the creature like a thunderstorm. It clawed at him, raking its claws across his exposed arm. Pain radiated deep into his bones, but Jacob had felt worse before. He had survived storms, droughts, and days with little to eat. This was simply another challenge in a long line of battles he had fought for his land. Fighting through the pain, Jacob swung the pitchfork again, this time connecting with the side of the second prowler. It let out another high-pitched yelp, staggering away, eyes wide in panic. The two prowlers, momentarily stunned, paused at the realization that this farmer was not as easily intimidated as they had hoped. He shouted, his voice resolute, masking the tremor of fear that snaked through him. It was a command laced with both defiance and desperation, each word a reminder that this land was his, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. Yet the Prowlers seemed undeterred by his bravado. They exchanged glances, low growls murmuring between them, their instincts steering them toward pack strategy. They were not just mindless beasts, they understood the balance of power, and they were calculating. Jacob felt a shift in the air, a pendulum swinging. The standoff was growing taut, the tension palpable, it could snap at any moment. With a sudden burst, they converged, darting in opposite directions, flanking him like shadows from a nightmare. Jacob's heart raced as he shifted his focus, desperate to keep them both in his sight. They circled like wolves, testing his defenses, each growl auditioning for the role of predator. He called out, swinging the pitchfork wildly, desperation fueling his strikes. For every thrust that came dangerously close to hitting the Prowlers, they danced just out of range, their agility startling. Slicing through the night air with raw energy, he felt a growing fear. What if he could not fend them off? What if he lost everything he'd labored to build? In that moment of doubt, Jacob remembered the history stitched into the very fabric of his land. Generations had fought for this soil, for its life and legacy. The rush of resolve filled him, grounding him against the encroaching dark. He wouldn't lose this battle, not to fear, not to shadows, not to Prowlers. Jacob shifted his stance, gathering himself like a coiled spring, ready to launch after the Prowlers darted in yet again. But this time, he wouldn't just deflect their attacks, he would initiate a counteroffensive. The larger Prowler lunged at his flank, teeth bared, but Jacob sidestepped and thrust the pitchfork straight forward. Caught the creature at the shoulder, drawing a furious snarl, and panic bloomed for the first time in its eyes. Jacob shouted, adrenaline surging as he battled both his fears and the Prowlers. But the Prowlers, now on high alert, scuttled back into the depths of the shadows, the confidence siphoned away from their growls. Jacob felt exhilarated, fresh energy surging through him, the thrill of standing his ground against creatures that would dare threaten his land. Yet he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The growls softened, but that only hinted at a strategy forming in their feral minds. He was aware they wouldn't give up easily. Instincts honed by survival guided their decisions. Both Prowlers were now circled around him again, surveying him with wary eyes, perhaps calculating their next attempt. Then something shifted in the air, a shift that resonated deep in Jacob's core. The thrill of victory quickly morphed into a pulse of almost tangible danger. Something told him they were regrouping, waiting for their moment to strike. The moon had disappeared behind the clouds, leaving the world draped in shadows, and Jacob felt his pulse quicken. He braced himself for the worst. Suddenly, the pair came at him from different angles, a terrifying blur of speed and teeth. This time, Jacob was ready. He swung the pitchfork, catching the larger Prowler with a deeper strike. It howled, but as it staggered back, the smaller one made its move, claws raking through the air, landing a grazing blow across his side. Pain lanced through him, clear and fierce, a stark reminder of the battle he fought. He let out a roar, not just one of pain, but of pure, unyielding will. He would not fold, he would not back down. With every ounce of energy left in his body, Jacob mustered a final stand. "You don't take from me." His voice tore through the growls, echoing into the darkness. Fear gave way to determination. The nights he had spent laboring through storms, and the mornings tending to crops all surged within him as he faced those Prowlers. He lunged again, thrusting the pitchfork once more. Sweat dripped from his brow while the air thickened with tension. With a deep, resonant growl, one of the Prowlers launched itself at him, sinking its teeth into the wooden handle of the pitchfork, wrestling it away from his grasp. The sudden roar of defiance mixed with the bite of pure desperation shocked him, setting his heart racing. Jacob shouted, eyes wide with disbelief. With surprising strength, the creature was pulling the pitchfork toward its companion. A wave of panic crashed over him as he realized he was losing his only means of defense against the looming threat. Time distorted the world, slowed into a haze of color and shapes. The second Prowler lunged again, and before he could react, fear gripped him anew. A sharp crack echoed through the clearing as the pitchfork broke free, flung into the shadows, and Jacob stood bare, without the one thing that anchored him to this fight. As darkness closed in, Jacob felt the prowlers draw near, unmistakable shadows gliding toward him, their feral eyes locked on him with a predatory hunger. The weight of the moment closed in like a vice, and his heart thundered violently in his chest. The time for bravado was over. He had fought valiantly, waking centuries of resilience, but now the prowlers' growls filled his ears, a sinister reminder of their dominance. It was in this moment of vulnerability that everything changed. Just then, a flash of light from the farmhouse awakened behind him. Jacob turned, hope flickering like the dawn on the horizon. The glow revealed a silhouette of figure standing firm on the porch, watching, waiting, golden light spilling like a warm hug against the encroaching dark. The voice rang clear and authoritative, cutting through the stillness. The shadows froze, the prowlers glancing momentarily toward the source of illumination. In that brief hesitation, Jacob sensed a turning point, a chance to either reclaim his strength or become prey in the unfolding night. The figure on the porch shouted again, a voice filled with courage that echoed in the tension-filled air. The prowlers, caught off guard, took a hesitant step back, fear flickering in their eyes. Jacob seized that moment. This was more than just a fight against beasts. It was a battle for everything he held dear. And in the heart of an uncertain night, everything hung in the balance. The question loomed, what would happen next? Would they flee, or would they decide that tonight the night would be theirs? The world stood still, the climactic moment teetering on the edge of resolution as he stood there, adrenaline still coursing through him, waiting for the next breath of confrontation, poised for whatever lay ahead.